Black Rifle Coffee, baby. Freedom fuel.
Hey, so cheers.
Congratulations.
Is this just water?
Congratulations.
Drinking? Thanks.
For your nomination to
For
Secretary of
what?
Defense.
yeah.
I heard you've been picked.
Yeah, I bet. I'm super fired up. I hope Pete crushes it. The thing about Pete is he's going to be a disruptor, and he's going to just blast, put a bunch of people in the Pentagon on notice that probably need to go. I was just having that conversation with Matt Williams.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Command Sergeant Major Matt Williams.
Yeah.
And
is he still in?
Yeah, he's still in. He's
what is he doing? I thought
Swick.
I'm confused now because when I grew up.
Are you sexually confused? Like, how are you confused?
Well, after your Rogan podcast talking about Afghans, I'm actually considering going back to do some recreation now.
You kind of look like a Hazara. You probably could have you could have blended in as a Hazara. Me. Yeah.
Just like me.
Just like you.
You know, I thought about what were we talking about?
Pete.
Oh, Pete.
Sorry.
Oh, no, the Medal of Honor thing.
Yeah.
When I grew up in my first 4 years, I had to do a stint in the Old Guard, the 3rd Infantry Regiment.
Yeah.
And I guarded the Tomb of the Unknowns, and it was a great gig. And got to go to Airborne and Ranger School, get my EIB, a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
All before 9/11. But part of my requirement for being a Tomb Guard is I had to know all of this knowledge on military history memorized, 28 pages, verbatim, not knowledge that I had to recite because I was a representation for the Army and on to cemeteries. So somebody asked me, I had to know.
Oh, right. That makes sense. I was trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Why would they make you do that?
It's part of it. They want you to know. They want you to know and respect and study kind of your what Arlington Cemetery is all about. But also they want you to be able to recite it, regurgitate it to sound smart when you're communicating to civilians, to groups of people who are there. So I always heard that Medal of Honor recipients, for example, like Audie Murphy, once you got awarded the Medal of Honor, you couldn't serve in uniform. Like you couldn't serve in a role that potentially would go down range. Like you would be stuck in basically a PR version of public affairs office to do stuff for the Army.
No, because Bastogne, he was killed I think he was killed on Iwo. He was killed in Iwo Jima.
I think they set those rules because of that.
Oh, interesting.
A lot of those rules were set because of that. So when I see guys like Williams still serving, I'm all about it. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome.
But I also think, you don't want to lose those guys. Those are representations for service.
I think it's just great because those guys have a God button, which, if you're a battalion sergeant major or one of those guys like Earl Plumley, Matt Williams, I mean, there's several of them that were in quite a while after, but they can speak the truth, and who's not going to step forward and listen. They can kind of beat down.
It's true.
Some of the 05 bureaucratic professional ladder climbing idiots that are trying to get a star. They'll do anything. And I think that's part of this whole culture clash within the military, which I want to get your 2 cents on, but like my 2 cents on it first, because it's my show, Mike.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. Is really, I mean, it's wokeism is part of it, but the other piece to this is you have this promotion system in the military, and guys are smart. They're going to figure it out. And I think you have two different groups, and I'm oversimplifying this. You have the missions and the me's, the guys that are there to serve the me that want to get promoted, and the guys that want to serve the mission. And those guys don't really give a fuck about getting promoted. They just want to really serve. That's what they want. They want to be in the mission. They want to be in the mix, and they don't give a shit about getting promoted. And then you have the guys that are the me's that are going, I'll do anything it takes. Like, who's ever dick I got to suck. Like, I
Even
will
two.
fucking, yeah, maybe two. Maybe Baker's does it.
Double
Who the
dick.
fuck cares?
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing with, I think, this, like, there's a water line in the military where you have those guys that are so committed to mission, and you have the people that are so committed to
Dick.
themselves.
Oh,
Dick.
sorry.
Yeah. They'll do anything. And that's where the people that will do anything constantly get promoted, and they fuck over the people that are like mission first guys.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You can disagree with me.
No, I agree completely, because what typically happens is you have somebody like me when I joined the Army, likely like you, that buys into the ideals of service, right? I was taught by my Army dad and my uncle that was in the Navy that retired, hey, service is paramount in this family. You serve.
Right.
You pick a job. You have the option to pick a job, but you're going to serve. Roger that. So even as a young kid growing up, I knew I was obligated by the Glover clan that I was going to serve the country no matter what. My granddad, my great-grandfather, a whole line of lineage that was evolved into service. And that's typically the experience, right? For military veterans is typically they come from families that have served. When you serve like that, you have grandiose ideas and you get into the military. You don't pre-plan anything, right? I never woke up and was like, yeah, I need to focus on my 4-year plan, because in 4 years after my initial enlistment, I'm going to get retained, re-enlist for whatever, right? But if you're an officer and you have political objectives in the future, you are in the middle of checking the biggest block as part of your path. And whether you're more intelligent, you have an academic experience, it's more deliberate, you just have a plan. And so there's a bunch of career soldiers who are serving because they're so-called lifers,
right?
Because that they know what they're going to do. They love what they do. They want to serve the country, whatever. And then you have a whole bunch of people that are typically coming into it temporarily with checking the big block so they can get the political appointment, right?
Right.
And that creates a bureaucratic system. And I know a lot of guys that I've served with who were really good officers, but mostly they came from the enlisted ranks. So they respected lower enlisted. They also respected the non-commissioned officer corps. But I mean, think about it. The non-commissioned officer corps is the opposite of what the commissioned corps is. So you have the non-commissioned officer,
right,
and you're serving, right? And when you look at, like, my last position in the military was a sergeant major, and I went to the sergeant major academy online while I was a CIA contractor overseas.
Yep.
And when I went to the military academic portion of the sergeant major academy, I spent a week, 40 hours on military museums. And I'm like, what the fuck am I doing right now?
What are you talking about? What do you mean?
Part of your indoctrination into the military sergeant major's academy for wearing the E9 rank is going to the academy where they create these courses that are basically curated by the sergeant majors of the armies that go in there, and then they create this curriculum. And I'm like, I'm in the CIA overseas working for half-timing as a sergeant major, as the operations sergeant major in Texas, the reserve guard component, and I'm working for the CIA. I have a bachelor's degree that took me 15 years in Homeland Security and Crisis Response. And so, like, I know strategy, I know tactical experiences. I have all of this experience, and I'm sitting here for 40 hours online taking a military class on museums. And I'm like, this is the problem with our fucking military. You have one corps, especially in special forces specifically, we know about this, where the officers are running the whole fucking thing. And you worked from E1, which I was at E1, 17-year-old E1, all the way to E9. And what do I have to look forward to? Being the head of fashion police.
Yeah.
670-1. There's so much focus on that because sergeant major, you need to go out there and enforce the rules.
Right.
Hey, bro, you're like, sideburns are getting a little long.
Right.
And I'm like, well, dude, what am I doing? And so I think there's a whole bunch of issues in the military. Bureaucracy is one of them. And when I think of Pete Hegseth, who started as a ROTC student at Princeton and then got his master's from Harvard, it's like, that's a good start point. Because you want somebody who's been in the military, worked themselves through the rank as a civilian, because I don't know why the legacy media doesn't know this. It's a civilian position. Secretary of Defense is a secretary cabinet member that his entire objective is to manage and liaison the military with the executive branch of government. It's like, that's what you do. And so you want somebody who served, but I don't want a fucking general. I don't want a bureaucrat in there. I don't want a Lloyd Austin who literally could disappear for a week. And at Walter Reed, he can go AWOL for a week. Nobody knows.
He's rolled out.
Nobody knows. And then that's okay because, he'll have a job with Halliburton when it's all said and done. Like,
I don't think Halliburton even exists anymore.
It doesn't?
I don't know. I mean, KBR, Halliburton, obviously all the military industrial contractors, but I'm not, I don't disagree. I don't disagree at all. I think it's good to shake things up. I think.
Do you have any problem with Pete?
No,
none.
No. I've appreciated him over the last several years. I've met him several times.
Yeah.
In Fox News, we bump into each other in events. He's always super positive, very, very professional, polite. Everything that he says, like, you don't have to agree with somebody 100% of the time, by the way, but I agree with him a lot. I think this last election is a referendum on the way that people have felt. Like, I felt like for the last several years that most of us have been under this like woke Gestapo thumb.
Weird.
Where you couldn't say anything or do anything that was outside of the scope of what's called politically correct, or they were going to, weaponize social media or, pull your platform or, fucking pull your banking relationships or something. Like, they would stop at nothing to shut any conservative up. And I think we've been, not we, I think as conservatives, I think people on the other side of the political spectrum, they have continued to try to muzzle conservatives up because, one, I think there's a lot of logic. Like, when you're holding the line on this like woke-tarded narrative, it doesn't make sense. It's illogical and it falls apart. You can't continue to defend it because human logic that's been literally compounded and built over, thousands of years of intellectual development will essentially erode the illogical position that they've taken. And dumb people continue to put out this narrative like it's an advanced or an evolution of intellectualism, which honestly, it's just completely, it's fundamentally flawed. It's gross. It's a veil for, socialism. It's a million different things. But what it really is it's a propaganda tool for people that really want to maintain their power and manipulate really stupid people into believing very stupid things. Like, that's what it is to me. So anytime that we can like literally cut it down, just cut it down, cut it back, like I'm 100% on board.
Yeah, I feel like I woke up the next morning and shaved my beard, and
bro, I've never been more excited about this country.
Like, it's a new start.
Yeah, I've never been more excited about this country. Like, I was talking to Don Jr. the other day, and I was like, man, this is one, you guys, your family they've just been put through the ringer for years. And finally, I think people saw through the bullshit. And yeah, they've got to the point now where if you look at that picture, it's so interesting. If you look at that picture from the UFC, it was like Elon, Tulsi, Trump, Vivek, like all these people. I'm like, RFK, thinking, man, these people, some of these people, a lot of them were Democrats. 6 years ago, they were Democrats. And now they're over here really what I think this is this is a referendum on the traditional politics. What I would say is on the right and the left, this is kind of the emergence of a third party.
The Lindsey Grahams of the world.
It's the Lindsey Grahams.
Lindsey Grahams of the world.
It's like these warmongering idiots that have literally stomped around the world, sacrificing, the courage of service members like time and time again for decades of no consequences. They can, fabricate dossiers, they can bury information, they can do all this really underhanded, horrible shit, and they can continue to push it out through mainstream media. And finally, I think with the rise of podcasts, with, the rise of social media, the people's voice has been heard. And so now you have, I think, a very eclectic younger group of people that are being appointed to positions, and they're going to shake things up. Thank God.
The average age of all of them is like me and you.
Yeah.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
You in the future of our country as that peer group, which it's a peer group. It's like they've been down selected. They've gone through the same class.
Yep. As
they evolve potentially decades into the future, there's still a prospect for a solid position for the country in politics. And I see all the old guard looking at all of the things that's transpiring, and they can't believe it. They're in shock on both sides. And I see that, and I'm like, that's what we need. We needed that from the onset. And the reality is we were so close from not having it, man. And it's so scary to think about in hindsight, but I'm glad things are happening the way they're happening.
Yeah, I've never been more excited about my government my entire adult life. It's always been like, okay, who's the next milquetoast bureaucrat that's going to push forward a bunch of taxpayer initiatives that are going to line the pockets of whatever corporation acts, maybe get some things through for the people. But I just think I think it's finally time where you've got like these guys that are extremely sophisticated in business, Vivek, Elon, Trump, and they can start to reconcile the books. Really, I mean, $35.5 trillion in debt. Like, guys, we can't afford it. At the end of the day, I don't think that the country, if it continues to grow its debt and we continue to loan money at the rate that we are, like the social programs, somebody has to actually speak up and say, hey, we can't actually afford this stuff. Like, I know you guys are trying to buy votes. Got it.
$1 billion.
Yeah. I know you're trying to do it.
$1 billion.
But we can't afford it, or you guys are going to drive the country off a cliff. Like, and I think that's quite literally what we saved. Like we collectively, whether people would probably admit it or not, like, I think with these guys, some of the smartest people in the world, like, I mean, I think it's always funny when people are like, oh, Elon's like, this guy's a idiot. And you're like, what? You mean the guy that's literally manufacturing rockets and catching them? That guy? You mean the guy that's like I think he's the wealthiest guy in the world, right?
Yes, he's the richest guy in the world.
Like, his IQ's
lobbing
probably
satellites into space.
Yeah. And you have these political pundits that might be writers for, the New York Times or for the Atlantic or something like this that are making these stories about this guy saying that he doesn't know what he's doing. It's like, guys, you're a writer on a desk somewhere. You're not building $1 trillion worth of value in companies, launching and pulling back rockets and putting satellites in space and interconnecting society, where you're talking about one of the smartest people in the history of humanity, and you guys are trying to convince the world that he's an idiot. Like, like, just the statement alone is stupid.
Well, he was the bastion of hope.
Yes.
For the Green New Deal, which he had an $800 billion contract under the Biden-Harris administration that was for his electric cars that magically, they don't even know why, they just went away. It's like it started going away because, again, the lawfare, the campaigning. And here's what the best thing about what happened is legacy media got called out.
Yeah.
Now everything they do everyone knows there's a manipulative element to it that's happening, that's propaganda. And so like all the articles now, like I see them coming out and they're bashing Elon, they're bashing Pete Hegseth, they're bashing Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, of course.
Like I just heard, which is funny because they're for sale. So MSNBC, you're for sale. MSNBC, it got released yesterday that MSNBC is for sale. And I saw one of the hosts from one of their whack shows calling Pete Hegseth a white supremacist.
Yeah,
and it's like, you can get away with saying that out loud. I mean, she should be sued for slander. I mean, because Pete has Christian tattoos on his body, he's somehow a white supremacist.
This like cry wolf culture, like people are deaf to it because they've done it so many times.
So
now.
weak
It's like,
too.
okay, whatever.
It's so weak.
Like, okay, good. Hey, yeah, run another, run another whole series of stories around these people trying to trash their reputations. What they did. I mean, perfect example is like, what did they try to do to RFK? They continued to just go after him over and over, deplatform him, manipulate using government resources to deplatform him from speaking, like overtly go after his reputation, call him everything that they could. He's a Nazi, he's this. And it's like, guys, he's talking about making America healthy. Like, what do you like? It's a little, and I don't know all the specifics. And so people are listening like, oh my gosh, Evan's like, super chips in. Like, I'm super chips in on free speech, and the government should not be in the business of deplatforming individuals that are trying to make the country healthier. They shouldn't be in the business of like deplatforming people specifically. Like, that's like freedom of speech is what we have. That's what we have. I think there's been a lot of people. I mean, fuck, you were a firsthand recipient. I mean, Tulsi was on the terrorist watch list. Like, you were too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me and Tulsi.
Like, oh yeah. Yeah. So, because you're a pro firearms guy going out and training people, all of a sudden you're a threat to someone. So you're a conservative, former soft guy out there training people, and you're pro 2A, you're a threat.
They call me a white supremacist.
Well, it's 50%.
50%.
I mean, technically
Half
50, half. Like,
it's supreme.
Yeah. It's just, they shouldn't be in the business of this. Like, they really need to get the fuck out of people's lives.
Do you think, I thought about this because I it's so good. And whenever I see so good, maybe it's the saboteur in me or the subverting nature of how I think things eventually go. They're going to go through a lot of difficult ups and downs through this. It's going to be difficult, but policy-wise should be the focus, right? Because they're running the House, running the Senate, and they run the executive branch. I thought about this as in Tulsi. I texted Tulsi a couple of days ago, and we had a little exchange, and I was like super stoked for her. But me and you have moved the DNI. Like, we've been in the same room as the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence. And I'm surprised it's still 17. It's only 17 intelligence organizations. It's a massive entity.
Huge.
And the DNI's office was created kind of to oversee the directors, because it used to be the director of the CIA was the DNI, but now it's an overseer to be able to communicate to the executive branch, to the president, exactly the shape of the intelligence and then the recommendations of what to do. The intelligence drives operations. It drives a lot of factors, especially in security, national security for the country. Nobody better than Tulsi Gabbard in that. And it's typically, as per the recommendation from Congress, supposed to be an active duty or Guard Reserve member who's an officer. And she happens to be a lieutenant colonel. I think her original branch was med, but it doesn't matter. Once you branch out of that at the tactical level, you become a flag officer or a senior officer, a commissioned officer, you literally, as a requirement, as a lieutenant colonel, fit that protocol and position. So she has the government experience, 8 years as a congresswoman. She has the military experience, and still people are going after her. They're bashing her. They're saying that she's worked in collusion with the Russians. It's we're still saying that? You're lying. And here's the question is, day one she gets in office, just like with RFK, who's running the CDC, who's going to run the FDA, which falls under Health and Human Services. Now, did you just put vodka in that?
No, it's these
Oh, okay. Just making sure. I saw you drinking on Rogan's podcast, and I thought to myself, man, maybe he's turning.
Maybe I'm turning into Lush.
He's like, America,
let's go. We're back, baby.
When I see them on day one, just like you would see a potential CEO, a commander, the deep state could be the subversion of the E1, the E4 mafia.
Yeah.
And my fear is because that position is so high, she has a protocol, she has a process, she goes in there. Cleaning house isn't like cleaning house. She needs a group of people that are executioners to be able to go in to that deeply corrupted state and go, hey guys, this is not how we're doing business anymore. Because if she just does it top down, shows up on day one, the entire time there's going to be people subverting her agendas. And I don't want to see that. You know, it makes me want to just like, I'm like, Tulsi, give me one agency. Give me one of the 17. Have me go in there at the tactical level, kick open a door and walk in there and be like, hey, what's up, guys? Like, what are we doing here? Because you need people at the tactical level to kind of figure out what's going on.
I think so. I think you need people with like a significant amount of experience. I think you need people that I was looking at this from even just a pure expense from the agency perspective. You know, when we were there, and I was there in multiple different roles, but one of the roles I had was doing, security and like a wide variety of things. And I was thinking about it. I was like, the case officers that were there needed protection from guys like us. But if you walk down the street, SF was doing the same exact thing, like the same thing. They just didn't need protection. So then you had these people that were coming in that were, certified case officers doing collection on the ground that needed millions of dollars of protection and resources because they weren't qualified to do collection in war zones. They couldn't do it because they didn't have the training, but they needed level 7 hard cars. They needed, protection detail.
An entire
all this.
of security.
They needed an entire like hundreds of millions of dollars worth of support to go out to do collection, and it didn't
a cable.
It didn't even make sense.
No,
because you would be essentially transporting them around the combat zone, and then I could go drive around in a thin skin. I did often, but these guys had to go anywhere, and they had to be like, protected like they were a fucking dignitary. You're like, but why are you here then? So you're costing the taxpayer millions and millions of dollars. You're less efficient because you can't get around, because you can't survive. You're basically like an infant baby, like, birthed and
that needs a nanny.
It's like, hey, I get it. We need those people that are running the cocktail circuit, that are out there in safe places, doing the things that they do. I get it. I understand that. But you didn't need to be there if you weren't qualified to be there, where you could go out and unilaterally do, intelligence without a bunch of, hardcore knuckle dragger former soft guys. You probably just didn't need to be there, period.
Well, when I joined the agency, my whole goal was to be a PMO staffer.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I checked the biggest block, which was my degree, because that's a prerequisite. And then when I got into the office of security and started seeing what Ground Branch was actually doing, I took a step back and was like, I don't know if I want to be doing this, because the contractors were just on the flat range, and you had guys who were former squadron CSMs that were just teaching indige from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m, and then having to fight with staffers to be able to do anything operationally. And I saw that frustration, and I'm like, why do I even want that? And then I thought, and then there was a new requirement, and this is open source as far as the requirement as it came down. But in high risk locations, you have a paramilitary person. they have an experience, a prerequisite to even get into the job or position. They have to have military experience as a PMO. I think it was at a minimum 5 years or 4 or 5 years to do the staff position, and then 6 years of SOF, 6 years of special operations experience to get in the position. I think for ours, it was like 4 or something like that. But experienced in combat with like the non-commissioned officer evaluation report of combat to be able to get in the position. I'm like, why would they not just send us to case officer school to get the qualification?
Well, because it was that was a way. I truly believe this, which is it was a way for them. If we go all the way back and we say let's isolate the power of the control, specifically related to a very a politically aligned demographic of people that were trying to maintain the control in the bureaucracy. Yeah. So if you're a group of, let's say, guys out of Harvard and Yale, and you're a bunch of guys out of the Ivy League schools, you want other people. Yeah. So we go all the way back to like Wild Bill Donovan and James Angleton and the guys that went from the OSS and then started the agency. And it was like all these young guys, and they were all coming out of Harvard and Yale, all of them. And I think that the history of the agency has to go all the way back to these guys were like bankers, lawyers, and they Wild Bill Donovan was pulling guys straight out of the banking industry. Yeah. Like, Dominus Ominous, you're a fucking spy now, and then sending them downrange. I mean, they had a fucking horrible track record after World War II in the 1950s.
Getting rolled up, right?
Oh, yeah, fuck, they were horrible. Yeah. Well, was it Kim Philby? He was a MI6 guy that was training James Angleton, who eventually became the director, I believe. I could be a little bit off on. It's not. I'm not like fully read in. I'm not like 100% on my facts here, but they're like generally specific. We're saying he was the head of counterintelligence for the agency back in the 1960s, and he was trained by a MI6 agent who was actually a spy for the Soviet Union. So we were almost 100% penetrated by the KGB through the head of counterintelligence for the agency, even from the 1960s.
You had one job.
And all of these guys were they were former OSS guys that essentially developed the agency. But they were also very specific in the way that they wanted a case officer to look. Like, they were all like, hey, we want PhDs that aren't afraid to get in a bar fight. I don't tend to disagree with this. I mean, Wild Bill Donovan had earned a Medal of Honor in World War I. He was really considered a pretty wild Bill, pretty wild guy. He was friends with FDR. He'd been pushing for this National Intelligence Service. So when we needed one after Pearl Harbor, who do you think was tapped to build it? It was Wild Bill Donovan. And I think there's this incredible history with these iconic figures that are associated with this, but it has actually needed to pivot, and it's needed to evolve into what I would say is a modern intel service. And I'm not saying everybody. There's tons of guys I know that worked over there. They were such good fucking guys, like very incredibly driven, incredibly smart, got higher IQs than me, 100%. But the way that they were just training, putting people out, I think they didn't have the power to really change, and they needed it, because you could see a laundry list of issues that were going on. You could see it. I mean, people, it's just like any government organization, right? It's like they figure out how to get promoted, and then, politics gets involved. And then when politicians start appointing people and they start driving politics through organizations, and then all of a sudden now you have a group of people that are more politicians than they are professional and strategic intel guys or professional military guys, because now they're playing fucking politics. And that's what happens with GOs is pretty soon, general officers, is pretty soon they're turning into politicians, and the way the selection requirements are for general in the Army, dude, there's a lot of politics associated with this. And I think one of the key factors is like really trying to get all the politics out. It's got to be very specific performance related. It has to be 100% driven on not only the experience, the intellect, the virtue, like you've got to be able to do a much more holistic assessment associated with the individuals you're going to put in power. You've got to be smart. Not only smart, they got to be wise. When you look at some of these other guys in very prominent American history, we built up a nuclear stockpile of weapons in the 1960s in the Cold War between the Soviets and the United States that would have blown up the world like multiple times. So why do you need a level of fucking nuclear arms that will blow up the world 3 times? Like once you hit the one point, like, oh wait, we're going to blow up the world once. Why do you need more? It doesn't even make sense. And then it becomes like an arbitrary arms race just to essentially bankrupt the other side. Okay, but wasn't there someone that could have stopped everybody? And I'm not saying they could because it's a very utopian fucking pipe dream to look back. But it's like, once you have enough where you're like, we will destroy the world once. Can we even destroy the world 3 times? It's not even fucking possible. Like, why are we continuing to build this? Oh, wait, because they could not put the brakes on. Nobody was there going, we have to like stop wasting taxpayer dollars. We have to stop wasting our strategic dollars on a build and a stockpile of nuclear weapons that ultimately are just redundant, because you've got the military industrial complex is like full right pedal all the time because they're making money fucking hand over fist. You think they're going to stop? They're like, oh, just keep building bombs. Like, holy shit. They just want to keep quiet, keep the accelerator down, keep taking them fucking free taxpayer dollars. That's what they want.
There's no stopping to it. And now for the first time, I think in the history of our country, we have almost like a reincarnated founding fathers coming in and literally laying the groundwork to stop the madness, which it seems mad. It seems crazy. Insane, right?
Yeah.
The only one, and I haven't even thought about this a lot, but I thought about Matt Gaetz.
Yeah.
And Matt Gaetz is somebody who's super he's probably the most controversial pick. Pete's becoming one of the most controversial picks.
Which I don't even understand.
For no reason.
I don't even understand. Yeah. It makes no sense to me. But whatever.
The Matt Gaetz one, he has a ethical inquiry, but then he resigned the position as a Congress representative, member of Congress, and then to give his constituents enough time to vote in another Republican so they don't lose that seat in, I believe, Florida.
Yeah.
Is it Florida?
Yep.
And that's awesome. They said it's going to take longer than a couple weeks. They thought it was going to take 4 to 6 weeks, but it's going to take 6 months. But still, he will get it will go through the Senate, and there will be a process, and they will bring up the points, and they'll debate those points. I'm afraid, like I think the cabinet, as down selected, is obviously up to the president. The Republicans should be on board completely and fully to support the president's agenda. Supposedly there's Republicans that are just not going to support certain people. And it's like, again, they're playing politics with it. It's like, this is the people that he appointed. This is what he wanted. This is what the American people voted for. 75 million Americans voted for this. And potentially they're going to stagnate some of the appointments. I think for the most part, they'll get through. I think Tulsi will be an easy one. I think Pete, ultimately, at the end of the day, will be easy. There is a accusation of some BS that they brought up that literally was investigated by the police in Monterey, California, and nothing
for Tulsi.
No, for Pete.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it was like a sexual assault accusation that went nowhere. And then he had a civil payout, which is common with NDAs. Sure. And then he moved on from it.
Bro, like everybody can accuse you of anything. Like, I mean, a couple years ago, right? I mean, you remember this. Like, I had a former employee that was accusing me of all kinds of fucking bullshit. And it was all false. Like, the guy fucking admitted he was false. Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody can, and I've hired thousands of people. Anybody can go down and file a a bullshit document accusing somebody of anything under the sun.
Yeah.
Like, I think people fail to realize that that's common practice. Like, anybody that's actually been in business for a significant amount of time, and maybe, like, for me, when you hire thousands of people and you have no fear as to, like, I go down, I talk to people, you build things, people are gonna just fucking have all kinds of different weird shit they come up with. I mean, I've been accused of things by people I've never met.
Yeah.
Like, I've never even met them. I've never even had one interaction. I had a guy say that he had come up to my office and we had drinks in my office and I was saying a bunch of fucking weird stuff. And I was like, I pulled up my calendar, like he was a former employee. I pulled up my calendar. I was like, I was in fucking Texas for that 2 weeks. So the day that he's even saying that I invited this fucking rando dude that worked my company for fucking 3 weeks. He's saying I was, having a bunch of weird conversations with him. Not what you're thinking, like anti-Semitic Nazi stuff. Yeah. I'm like, yeah. So I wasn't even in the state. So that's not even possible.
Yeah.
I sent my calendar back. This is where I was. It wasn't even possible. More importantly, I very infrequently drink.
Yeah.
So it's like all of this shit doesn't hold up, but you still have to defend everything you say. You have to defend everything you do, everything you say at all points in time. And now, because it is common practice, because it is such a litigious society and people know how to get fucking paychecks, like, oh shit, all I got to do is say this and then pretty soon just make it up. I mean, we've both been the recipient of fucking fiction, all kinds of fiction. And that's just part of sometimes being successful is people are going to make shit up. That's one of the reasons years ago when, Trump was being accused of all this stuff, I was like, oh, well, this is just common practice.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden somebody has a little bit of power, a lot of wealth, and then they're going to be persuaded by the other party to file a bunch of fucking different bullshit. And who knows who's paying people to file whatever on, the DNC's behalf. I mean, trace it back to the Clinton dossier that they paid for that tried to tee them up, the entire Trump family, to look like they were Russian assets or they're colluding with Russia. It was paid for by the Clintons.
Yeah.
And it's MSNBC seems to just forget about that, right?
Yeah.
Alan Schiff or Schiff or all these other guys can say whatever they want. They can accuse people of treason. They can do all kinds of nefarious shit. No accountability. Once again, so when you've been the direct recipient of just false information being put out, you're like, oh, I see right through this. This is exactly what this is.
Yeah.
Like, and what's actually stuck? Nothing.
Even the stuff they brought up with Trump, I thought it was so weak. That's all you got?
Yeah.
And Diddy can get it, or the Epstein list. It's like, I can't even believe that Diddy did what he did, diddling like seemingly everybody.
Yeah.
And he got away with it so long. And then all these people who came out, like J-Lo, when I saw J-Lo come out and she got on her virtuous, platform and was like talking poorly about Trump and everything that this country was going to go through. I'm like, you were with likely one of the most infamous perverts in the entire world at parties with him.
That's your friend.
Doing some shady shit.
Yeah.
And that was your boyfriend.
Yeah.
Which is
so weird.
So gross. The whole thing's gross.
What would you do? So let's just say you're king for the day, right? So Mike Glover's king for the day.
I thought you were going to ask me if I was P. Diddy for a day.
Yeah, well.
There would be two different things, King versus Diddy.
Yeah. So if somebody said, hey man, you got a pen and a piece of paper here. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to rewrite the way you could fix the United States military. Like, all right, ready, go.
A lot of it would be investing. And I'm not saying reinvesting. I'm saying investing in special operations forces.
Right.
Because we were in the military in the 90s when Shinseki Is that what's his name?
Shinseki.
Who at the time was a general officer and then became, what did he become? Secretary of the Veteran Affairs Office.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
Yep.
he was the Secretary of Veteran Affairs. You took a general officer who took away the black beret from Ranger Battalion. I was in the conversations with the guys from Ranger Battalion at the time that saw the conversation with him when the bulb, the very dim bulb went off in his head, when he decided to take the black beret from Ranger Battalion and give it to the entire army, because he thought that's what it was about. He said, there's something distinguished about these men. And he probably said it in a Japanese accent because he was half Japanese or full Japanese. And I'm not racist because I'm Asian. I'm
no,
Asian.
it's impossible for you.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
So when he said that, he like many officers at 30,000 feet neglected to see the ground truth on the ground. They had perspective and made a lot of assumptions based on their ISR view of the world, but they missed it. He thought these guys have black berets and it's about the black beret. No, it's about their esprit de corps. It's about their standards. It's about their selection and assessment. That's where the pride comes from. So when they shave their black beret and they mold it to their head and they are proud of the insignia that represents the Ranger battalions, the 75th Ranger Regiment is that thing that developed all those men and women in support roles at the time. And so I look at that and go, that's how the bureaucrats think about it. They look at like insignia. They look at rank. They look at the black beret. It's like, no. You're missing the whole point. So one thing that Shinseki did was he focused on lightening the military, which was a good move. He actually was part of the conversation, and it migrated to others that decided to do a more agile unit. And we stood up striker brigades, and we used strikers. I used strikers, like with task force, Ranger Regiment, CAG, the CIF, SF. We're using strikers to go, Panders and strikers, light vehicles to do direct action raids. It was lighter, it was more agile versus heavy armored separate brigades that were utilizing big World War II era vehicles. And we needed to be quicker. We needed to be more agile on the battlefield. Good move. I think Special Operations Forces as a whole, use of FIC, Ranger Regiment, use of SOC, MARSOC, take them all. I think we need to invest more into them. And I think we need to evolve them and not cheapening and down selecting with lesser standards. But I think that is the future of the military. It is small teams of organizations that go into X nation, and because they have the cross-training and the capability as a whole, minimizing resourced assets for themselves, organic assets, and leveraging other assets to bear to bring the pain to the enemy. One ODA, one light small unit organization with the assets to bear can bring a lot of pain. We saw what happened with Triple Nickel and all these organizations at the beginning of Afghanistan.
Talking about fifth group, it's the ODA 555.
Yeah, we saw what happened when Trump said, he paraphrasing here, he went to his generals like Milley, who is more worried about woke issues in his force, white rage. He was more worried about that than he was actually fighting the wars. And it's the War Department. He went to the generals that focused on war, like Scott Miller, and said, hey, we need to crush ISIS. How do we get this done? And Scott said, you give me the permission to decentralize, utilize my organizations, and I'll get it done. And I'll get it done in faster than anybody else can get it done, because of the way that we're able to mobilize and assert ourselves on the battlefild. So he took Ranger Regiment. He took a joint task force, JSOC, and, with bits and pieces, MARSOC supported that effort. USAFIC supported that effort. And they crushed and annihilated ISIS off the face of the planet in a year, right? That's what we need to be able to do. We don't need brigade-size elements. Let me give you the sum up of this. We don't need airborne operations. You want to save money in the Defense Department? Get rid of all airborne operations, except in special operations. Every operator across all the branches should be free fall qualified and free fall trained and sustained trained the entire time they're in uniform. I was in USAFIC belonging to the two ODAs, one of the two ODAs that were sniper reconnaissance military free fall qualified guys in the SIF. There's only 2 sniper units per group that were technically snipers as a job. And that was in the SIF company, the two ODAs that were sniper reconnaissance teams. And we had a hard time getting the budget allocated for us to do free fall sustainment training. It's like, what? I was a sniper free fall team sergeant and had to like wheel and deal with networks that I had to be able to get us to do advanced free fall like ADIC and Yuma. Why are we doing that? Well, because we're spending billions of dollars a year sending pack clerks and support guys on mass TAC jumps.
Yeah.
And their, basic airborne refreshing training to launch them out of C-17s. That's an expensive endeavor. Guess what? When I came back to active duty after my 4-year enlistment, and I came back and I was airborne qualified, a 5-jump chump, and was going back into an airborne organization, I did a 1-day refresher called BAR, Basic Airborne Refresher, jumping out of the 34-foot tower, jumping on the ground, doing a practice PLF, and they put me in an aircraft and pushed me out of the aircraft after 4 years of not being on airborne active service.
I have been out since 15.
And you jumped in an Normandy.
I know. And I did.
Did you shit your pants?
No, I did 1-day refresher. No. I did a 1-day refresher.
Don't say that so easily.
I don't care. It's just physics, right? It's like if you believe in gravity, which I tend to, right? It's like there's a few things I believe in, which is, you go through your inspections, your checks, you've got good training. At the end of the day, as long as you're in a good body position when you exit the aircraft, like you're gonna
survive.
You're like 99.99999% of the time that chute's gonna open. Okay, cool. And then if it doesn't, you got an extra. Like that stuff doesn't bother me. So
you don't need to jump once a month.
I haven't jumped in almost 10 years. Well, it was 10 years by the time I jumped.
You haven't jumped static
I went
line.
through
You jumped free fall a lot.
Yeah, I jumped free fall. But it was like 1-day refresher. It wasn't even a day. It was like 4 hours. Then I was like back in, a 1940s era aircraft leading the stick out in Palaca, Florida. That was the first jump that I had done. My point in that entire conversation is like, this is not a 3-week fucking course. The Army stretches it out. Yeah. To your point, I could not agree more. You're spending millions, probably hundreds of millions of dollars.
Hundreds. It's got to be.
But more importantly, you're also injuring a bunch of people that are taking away from your combat effectiveness. Then you have to pay for those injuries while they're in service because you're paying for their time out for recovery. Then you're paying for the post-service injury. If they get injured, they're going to continue on in the VA service from something that they're never going to use in a combat role. So and take all the MOSs out of it and you say, okay, great. Well, the 82nd Airborne needs to be airborne qualified. Okay. Well, that would be the charter. You have to
get them the 3-week course. Let them run it themselves even.
Sure. Let the 82nd run their own course. Like, you know how long it takes a SEAL to get parachute qualified?
Isn't it like a week?
Yeah. It's a week.
Yeah.
So if you can't pass this training course in a week, so now you're going to cut the course down by 2/3. So you're going to save a ton of money that way. Now you don't have to centralize the school. You don't have to do any of these things. There's so many different inefficiencies.
The fuel?
I know the fuel alone. So even if you just put them through a course and said, okay, guys, like we're going to put you guys through a course, we're going to have the JMs are going to maintain certification and those JMs are going to maintain their certification. Sure. Like we used to have that conversation all the time. We're like, why are we fucking jumping, man? Like if I get injured on this jump, if I break a fucking leg on this jump, I might risk not being able to deploy on a combat rotation where my ODA needs me because I'm going to do a jump for the Christmas party.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
A Hollywood non-combat jump, you're going to risk the entire force because you have to maintain currency. That doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
And so when you're thinking about it, you're like, but we have to do it. This is tradition. And guys, this is about the lineage and tradition and making sure that, we're all committed to do hard things that are dangerous or whatever. I'm like, yeah, man, like everybody here is committed to do this. But what we shouldn't be doing is risking our combat effectiveness because of a tradition.
Yes.
Like, let's just think this all the way through. And how many times did SF do a static line jump into combat in the last 20 years? How many?
A handful of times. A handful. And most of them, like the one that 10th group did, was on a secure drop zone. If we had it again, like,
but even then, dude, you're talking about a week train up.
Yeah.
Create
a charter again. Yeah. My focus would be on special operations.
Yeah.
And then creating specific charters to focus that. Let me give you my last one because this is a pet
peeve.
Please, yeah. The intelligence gathering by special operations forces, because they go to level 2 or even level 1.
Yeah.
And the inability for them to cross synergize with inner agencies like the CIA is ludicrous. I mean, when I deployed to Libya and I ran the 1208 program there, I deployed with an 18 Fox. The chief of base told my 18 Fox he wouldn't be utilized or needed because we already have that covered. And I'm like, chief of base, Nick, no offense. Like, you have your specific thing covered, which is counterterrorism intelligence, written in a cable and disseminated through the Central Intelligence Agency. If Ground Branch is part of that, then somebody operationally is getting that. I got that. But we are creating intel for USAFIC that's very important to our command. For example, in my case, Special Operations Command Africa, I'm recruiting, Special Operations units already recruited the guys. I got the guys. So I was running the selection. I was running part of the selection process and part of the training process to get them qualified. And then we were supposed to do counterterrorism operations with them. Well, in the conduct of assessing, selecting, and training anybody on the planet Earth, you're going to have information that can likely be distilled into intelligence to be disseminated, especially in force protection. So don't take that away from me. Don't take my ability to disseminate force protection intelligence that's potentially going to give situational awareness to follow on institutions, including my own guys, or give me force protection security information that is going to benefit the organization, my organization, Special Operations Command Africa, AFRICOM, etc., that's going to allow us to make better decisions and keep guys safe. No, I don't want any of that. So you want me to shut up the entire apparatus? Okay, CIA chief of base, because you're the head collector here on this in this country, on this continent, I'm just going to do it anyway. So we did it. I'm like, collect intel, keep it within the team. We need to know what these guys are doing. We need to know the relationships, the partnerships, who's who in the zoo, who's the bad guys, who's the good guys. This guy's from a militia called the Zintans. Are they good or are they bad? Can we use them to build rapport? Dude, there were cases where we had AQIM in the town, in Tripoli, Libya, where because we developed our own intelligence, I was able to avoid the roadblocks that had AQIM guys on it, where I was using militias to facilitate corridors for my guys to get home safe from being at a remote base in the middle of Libya back to the embassy in the middle of the night. And it's like this whole thing where you have 10 different organizations, USASOC, every organization in the military is collecting their own intel, and none of them are talking to each other. So I would have that under wraps and just come to terms with it. And, there are specific players like the unit, like USASOC, like JSOC, that have more assets dedicated. They would control a lot more of the real estate, and we would report to them. But just to say that because 17 organizations in the intelligence community that are doing it, that's not good enough, man. We've dealt with it, getting the phone call at the fire base, like, hey, your base is going to get attacked tonight at midnight. Cool, like, who are you? And then they hang up the phone. I'm like, was that a real call? Was that a crank? Was somebody screwing around? No. That's what happens. The CIA,
call?
they always call in and give us intel like that, and then they bail.
Going back to your king for a day, right? You can make all the changes you want and, invest more in special operations. So one of my thoughts has been for a long time, like there's like one organization basically, and it's all like the military just becomes basically a feeder organization. So in order to be even part of the intelligence community, like you have to join a service. I know this is like crazy for me to think about, but like, okay, so you want to be a case officer, you want to be an intel guy, great. You got to be in the Air Force, the Marines, the Navy, whatever it is first. And then you can eventually go to a selection process that allows you to like go on and do this. So one of the thoughts that I had was like, what if you had one special operations and intelligence command, basically, and it was like one unit. So if you join the Marines, okay, we'll just take in this scenario, you join the Marines, you serve your first enlistment in the Marine Corps, whatever that is, and then you can go to the special operations and intelligence selection. And then it's like you go to the selection for the thing. So if you want to go into the special operations, you're like, but I'm going to go to a selection for the maritime guys. And that maritime selection is going to look more like BUDS. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm going to go to, the SF selection, and that's going to look more like SFAS. I'm going to go to CAG selection or whatever it is, and it's going to look more, but they're curated not by the branches, but basically by a centralized special operations and intel community. Basically, each one of those pipelines would be separate, but essentially you would take the special operations out from the individual branch, put it underneath a centralized service that basically answers the call to the larger strategic and intelligence mission of the United States government. Is that crazy?
No, it's not crazy at all. I think the apparatus already exists, and these intelligence organizations that do the recruiting. I mean, like ground branch is biased, like ground branch, depending on who's running the office, which seemingly every time I applied was a damn Marine. Like I love Marines, but because I wasn't a Marine, I was like, what did you do in the military? Like, oh, you were a combat controller. Oh, you were a force recon guy. You were this guy. When did you come in? Likely because the head dude in charge was an Air Force dude. They brought in, I don't know, like a PJ. I'm like, I'm a Green Beret. Like my entire mission was to do counterterrorism, foreign internal defense. I was taught that from the schoolhouse. I didn't come along 10 years post the experience in SOCOM caught up and said, we need to send MARSOC dudes to train and learn how to train Indige. Right. That was what I was getting into from the beginning. And so I show up on day 0 and I'm like, why am I not being picked up for GB when I literally have been training dudes my entire life? Like I've gone in with a logistical train and ran multi-million-dollar budgets to go, hey, how do we feed these dudes? How do we house them? How do we get beans and bullets? Like there's a whole thing there. It's a learning experience. And the CIA doesn't recruit for that? No, they don't.
Yeah.
So why would the intelligence community not go, hey, we have an entire level 2, level 1 program that exists in Special Operations Command. Why don't we just go down there? That includes women, by the way.
Sure.
Why don't we go down there and start talking to these people and recruit them to be the next era of case officers? And I get like there's a very distinct action arm or tentacle of that entity that should be the diversified that comes from Ivy League.
No. I'm not saying that you don't recruit from there. I'm saying if you were to eliminate the redundancy, because in SF you got dive teams, and then you've got SEALs that are doing dive ops, and you got MARSOC, and you got all these different guys. They're all doing dive ops, and they're all doing dive ops for different areas. But a lot of this is centralized around what basically the needs of special operations, and then where do they need to go? And to be fair, I've been out of this for a long time, so I can't really speak to it with the high degree of authority where a lot of you listening could be like, hey man, that fucking never work. This is just me like shooting the shit with my buddy Mike, talking about like wazoo things that might be helpful for organization, effort, and execution to get one, a lot of the expenses of redundancy out of the budget. So, you know, a centralized recruiting and vetting program. It's like, great, you're all going to go through, and this is in this scenario, right? We're rewriting the way that things are done. So in this scenario, you dismantle all of the individual branches, special operations. Got it. Then what you do is you rebuild it and you say, but everybody trying out for special operations basically has to go through the same 2-week selection program before they go into a specialized and curated selection program for the actual special operations mission, if that makes sense. So you'd have
JSOC does
because
that.
like you think about like the support. Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. Like JSOC support is a good example.
Yeah.
They all go through, what is it, a 2 or 3 week selection, which is like kind of the same shit that you do, but it's like light, right?
Light. Yeah.
So you go through that. It's like, okay, great. So now everybody, you go through the selection with all the support guys and everything else. You go through the same one. Last 2 weeks, cool. But then you want to take the next step. You go through the specialized selection program that puts you into the pipeline saying, hey, you know what? I got an aptitude for diving. I want to be in the fucking, dive teams. I want to be this. I want to be that. I want to be this. You take the best combat divers across the entire spectrum of the field of professional divers, specifically related to the special operations community, and you have them take the best pieces of each and every one of those, and then you develop a schoolhouse, right? And then everybody goes to that and says, okay, this is the dive guys, right? This is the special operations, and what, for a lack of a better term, this is like, it's a joint, specialized, dive force, whatever that is, special warfare diving or whatever. And basically you have all the different services coming together. Yeah, it's just centralized. That way it's like, well, if the Navy's going to do this out in Coronado, they're having a lot of what I would say is people from the street join, they go into the Navy, and then the Navy is like, this is the Navy, Navy SEALs, right? And okay, but there's not a lot of lateral movement there for guys that are like, you know what, man, I really want to go over here and I want to do something, maybe like to your point, I want to train in Dig, and I really want to be like more focused on FID, which is, by, with, and through. I want to be a covert action guy, or I want to be a direct action guy. Like, you could quite literally have access to the entire best and the brightest of the special operations community because it's under one umbrella, and everybody kind of gets to choose their own path based on individual desire, where they want to go. And then there's more, what I would say is unilateral decision-making, and ultimately tactical mobility, and the ability to go, you know what, I want to be on a mountain team, or I want to be in a DA team, or I want to be here, or I want to be there. It's like basically choose your own destiny. Do you think that would work, or is that fucking crazy?
No, that's not crazy at all. That's look, that's what SOCOM and JSOC were stood up post the debacle of the Iran hostage circumstance. I mean, you have a helicopter that runs into a C-130. You got operators that are killed. You have guys who show up that don't realize what they're doing, don't know the extent, don't have the potential capability to fly in harm's way.
Right.
And, the Dietz portrait of that is the guts to try. It's like, guess you needed the guts to try because everything was a shit show.
Yeah. And
it showed and demonstrated to a lot of people on the ground, and obviously the command, that we needed a joint effort. We needed to pull in our resources. And JSOC was always that. Now that the SIF has been disbanded, I can't say this out loud, but there's so many people, even from Special Operations Command, who don't even know what the SIF was. The SIF was from the days of Beckwith competing with Special Forces Command to develop the HR, special reconnaissance.
Yeah, wasn't like the Genesis was like blue light?
Yeah, it's blue light.
SF was blue light.
At Mott Lake, they had a competition.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why this hasn't been. It's been written about in paragraphs or chapters in books.
Yeah,
there should be a whole book committed to it, because what happened was after the development of Delta and Beckwith winning that based on his experience with the SAS, he won. That left Special Forces Command with a capability, and they call it SOT. That capability migrated or evolved into the Commanders in Extremis Force. The Commanders in Extremis Force was a reinforced, basically plussed up company that was managed by JSOC. And if you say that out loud, if I said that out loud 10 years ago, people would have had my head, because it was like a read-on. It was actually a read-on. And I've been in the Delta Force compound talking to J3. I've been in USASOC compound talking to J3. I've been downrange talking to lieutenant colonels and General Ham, like the general of Africa Command. And nobody knew what the hell was, nobody knew who we were. And I was like, guys, we're a specialized reinforced company that's like the equivalent of a local SWAT team that responds to a crisis site. Let's call it a hostage rescue. And one of the 5 major AORs, areas of responsibility, that we're there in the theater anyway. So we react, respond, we have the capability, and we also have handover capability to hand it over, like a SWAT team would hand it over to HRT in continental United States. OCONUS, the SIF, would hand it over to the National Mission Force, a Tier 1 unit.
Sure.
We are funded and controlled by JSOC. U.S. Special Forces Command didn't like that. And so there was always this butting of heads. Those are my guys. No, these belong to JSOC. Like when I stood up the C210, the Commanders in Extremis Force for Africa, because we didn't technically have one, because 5th group and 3rd group there's a swapping of AORs, which I was in 3rd group when that happened. Everybody was butthurt that we got specialized training, that we got to train on Range 19 on the compound with Delta Force, that when we were downrange under Task Force 16, we were hitting targets as one of the action arms belonging to JSOC. And nobody knew why.
Right.
And when we got back, nobody knew why. And so like when I had relaxed grooming standards in C210, and somebody from the command would come up to me from 10th group and be like, who are you? I would have to go, hey, talk to Dietrich, my commander at the time, who's like, Mike, anybody tells you and anybody fucks with you, you can tell them to come talk to me, because I was one of his recce troop team sergeants that was managing this whole thing. When we went out to Utah and got validated by JSOC, people didn't know what the fuck was going on. When I ran the 1207, 1208 program that was under JSOC, and it was SOCAF's first specialized 1208 program, they didn't know what the fuck to do. Man, in Algeria, when hostages from America, from Texas, were taken, I called the J3 or the S2. I tried to get a hold of the intel office, and in the middle of the night, like, hey, there's some shit going on. Sergeant, who's this? Like, this is Master Sergeant Glover. I'm in Libya. I'm trying to figure out to get the more evolved intel picture of what's going on so my guys can start preparing for this. Oh, there's not even a job. We don't run a full-time jock. What? We just run staff duty. Like, we have a couple dudes that are up. I realize JSOC as an entity that's building this apparatus since the 80s has a complete global pursuit apparatus of all the branches and services that does the thing, and nobody else is included. Because if you're not part of the entity, you're kind of pushed to the side because we don't want your input because we got a thing going here. And what I realized is, like, if JSOC wanted to do it right, they should, I mean, if we were king for the day, it shouldn't be USASOC, USAFIC, it should be JSOC. The special operations entity that is SOCOM, which is the C2 node that's decentralized in Tampa, shouldn't even exist. It should be JSOC main with all the branches of influence under one entity, call it Soft Command, SOFX, whatever you want to call it. That's the entity, and no branches of service should have the onus to own and operate their own special operations entity. Because what happens is you get a fucking commander who's from the big army, who's for the first time in his life, because special forces falls under big army command, under the branch. We're a branch under 18 series under the big army. That's what fucked us, by the way. So when you call branch, you're talking to DOD. I also think tier 1 units shouldn't be in the military. I think if you're a tier 1 operator or you work for a tier 1 organization that belongs to the National Mission Force, you should be a contractor. As soon as you get through selection and as soon as you say, I'm committed to this organization, you should literally get a GS-11 ID card.
Oh, that's going to be controversial.
And you shouldn't belong to the Department of Defense. Why would I stagnate my guys? When I was in the unit and we had, I won't even say his name, a command sergeant major that came from the big army that went through Ranger Regiment, his first act as the premier CT unit in the organization was to make sure everybody had haircuts, shaved their beards, had call sign. I mean, it was getting out of control, but call sign patch on one side, squadron patch on the other side, unbloused their boots, unauthorized. And I was like, well, if everybody was a GS contractor, you wouldn't have to deal with that because we wouldn't have to focus on like the dog and pony. They could focus on what they do the best, killing bad guys.
Yeah.
And I know that would be controversial, but if you ask the guys in the building, it likely wouldn't be controversial for them because they have to juggle this line of effort where you're still doing non-commissioned evaluation reports in this weird hierarchy that's still the military when you should be designated in a corporate structure with efficiency from a Fortune 500 company. How to kill bad guys.
You should be constantly looking for efficiencies to make them more mission capable, which I think they've done a good job. Like they have a great job, but they have to firewall themselves away from the regular military bullshit to be hyper effective, which is one of the things that I think Pete has brought up multiple times, which is focusing on woke culture topics and the DOD takes away from the mission effectiveness
Absolutely
for the force.
Yeah.
So he's not wrong whatsoever. Eliminating that, maintaining your mission focus, like that would be a huge part of some of the changes. I was trying to think about like just the efficiencies that you would get from consolidation of forces, eliminating redundancies, really shaking things up. One of the other things I was thinking about was I think anytime there's a war, like literally a hot war, there should be, which I know Tulsi disagrees with me, but there should be conscription. And this is why. Like, she makes some really good points, and she made them on a couple different shows, which is you shouldn't be in a foxhole with somebody that doesn't want to be there. Yes, but we also shouldn't be in wars where the general public doesn't have a vested interest and they're not committed to being there. And I think it forces voters to pay attention to what's happening. And I'm not saying that they need to be in even combat roles. I think
they need exposure.
They need exposure because I think Americans in general, I'm part of the GWAT that's allowed the GWAT to, like, when I say all the GWAT wasn't bad, by the way, it was, if you go back to Iraq, if there would have been conscription during Iraq, I'm not sure Iraq would have gotten through, to be honest with you. If GW would have said, okay, well, in order,
these guys are sending their daughters and sons to.
I'm pretty sure people would have said, "Pump your brakes, there, cowboy."
Yep.
Like, you and the other orchestra of idiots involved in this, you're not going to send my kids off to an unjustified war. People would have been paying attention, and they would have voted appropriately at that point. I really do. I think they would have paid attention, but because Iraq was on the American mind, but not every day on the American parent saying, well, shit, if we're going to go to Iraq and Iraq turns into a quagmire, which it did, and then thousands of American lives and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis were going to be directly affected. Wait, I'm not going to sign up for that. And more importantly, like if conscription was like from 18 to like 40.
Yeah.
Everybody would start paying attention. Everybody would be like, wait, hold on. What are you guys planning on doing? And there's no way that you could fight a war for an extended period of time where you're having massive losses. There's no attainable mission success criteria. It's an endless supply of casualties. When I say casualties, I'm talking about Iraqi and American casualties, without people saying, absolutely not. It's got to stop. And when Americans say we want to go to war, they say that's okay, because when I looked at it, you had a huge amount of patriotism and this surge after 9/11. You had hundreds of thousands of men and women that joined the armed services after 9/11 because we were attacked, right? Okay, you directly affected the force based on the amount of patriotism and commitment that people had. They had a very specific mission success, like in their head, I'm going to overseas to fight terrorism so it doesn't come here to the States because we are attacked, right? Like, however, as that starts to wane and they start to sell this other war that we both fought in, if that would have been part of the criteria, saying, well, no, hey, diddle, diddle, everybody down the middle, I don't think that one would have got across, man. I don't, because I think that people would have said, wait a minute, hold on, I'm going to write my congressman. I also think that it allowed this war to continue on because you had tons of patriots that were bought in because of the mainstream media essentially just went chips in with the narrative. 2, we felt like we were attacked after 9/11. 3, you wanted people the military was able to recruit people based on economic mobility, meaning if I join the military, I'm going to get my college paid for, and I'll be able to transition out of, below or just above the poverty line and put myself on a professional track that will get me out of, my mining town or my logging town or wherever it is. Well, now if you had that load spread across every economic circumstance in the United States, all of a sudden everybody starts paying attention.
Yeah,
like
that's
real
diversity.
Yeah, you start paying attention
actual
real
diversity.
fast.
Yeah, you want equity and diversity, national service.
And by the way, I'm not saying I'm right. Like, I'm just a guy who's like going through a thought exercise as to like what it is, like what is going to help our country move through what I would classify as this huge amount of distrust in our politicians, which is, I'm not the only one thinking it. I'm not the only one feeling it.
Well, if I was one of these secretaries, like even like Tulsi, like I hope she would bring, not that we would make the list, but hope she would bring in external experience that's going to give her the best advice,
right,
like this. I mean, like, this is not just off a whim. This is 20 plus years of working in this world of government that me and you have been through, that if we had to fix things, it's like, there's a lot of things that we saw that we could fix. And if we're prioritizing a few, imagine if she had a board of advisors, which I know Tulsi, she operates that way. She's a leader like that. That's what she's going to do. Because if you just do it based off of analytics or numbers, and you're not getting down into the root of what the culture is, you're not going to fix the culture. You have 4 years, just like any short stroking, checking the block. You don't have a lot of time.
The clock's ticking.
The clock's ticking. You don't have a lot of time. 4 years is not a long time.
You got to get guys like Joe Kent. You got to get guys like that to be part of this. Like,
Joe Kent will be the first dude that he'd be a perfect advisor to the president, even on these kind of topics and issues, which I thought about when I heard he had picked up that seat in Washington.
Yeah. I think Joe would be a perfect fit for this. Like, I mean, I couldn't imagine a better fit from a guy that has multiple combat rotations in, SF and other units, and then went on to the CIA, has like a significant
his wife was
loss
killed by a suicide bomber
in Syria
while serving in a uniform.
So
wild.
He has a vested interest in making sure that people are making the right decisions.
Yeah,
he does, and I couldn't imagine a better fit for that. That like an advisory role or some type of role. keep my fingers crossed. I just hope like they're being very analytical and they're selecting for like true combat service. And I think they have. I mean, shit. I mean, JD was a Marine, right? So he served. Like these guys have all served, and that's, I think, one of the most encouraging things that I've seen is like, hey, let's pick and pluck the guys that have been just the most committed to being some of the most outspoken people too. Because I said it on Joe's podcast, right? It's like the massive amounts of distrust that we have in politicians because of they have violated the trust of the American people. They have completely failed. They have failed. Yeah. And like, I just keep coming back to this where it's like rules for thee, not for me, right? There's a separation between the rules that what I would say is the politically and bureaucratic elite of this country, the rules they have to follow and the rules that we have to follow. And we saw it like we saw it in little things where, you know, the Joes couldn't drink, but the generals sure as shit could, right? So there's this thing out there where, you know, guys serving downrange, like, you know, we can't trust those guys to do it, but we're the trusted few agents that, you know, I can have a glass of wine and my fucking hooch at night, and I can do this and I can do that, and I can fly around on helicopters and have really nice uniforms and go in and out of these really, you know, basically these high-end shops in Kabul and some of these other places when you got, you know, 20-year-old Marines that are literally living in the fucking dirt in the middle of nowhere, you know, shitting in a box in the field, wearing the same uniforms over and over. And you've got guys jet setting around, banging their biographers. You know who I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And it's rules for thee, not for me. It just has to change. Like, it just has to change. Like, and
how do you feel about women in the military? I wanted to ask you that before. I wanted to get Tulsi's perspective on it because I know she was asked that.
Yeah.
But I saw Pete's Sean Ryan podcast and how he laid it out, and I was like, ooh, that's going to ruffle some feathers. And then I wasn't sure how Tulsi felt about it, and I didn't see the interview where she was going to answer that question, but I wanted to know your input on it.
Well, I think that like I think as we've integrated more females into what I'd say is combat MOSs, because it's happened, obviously we know that, I'd have to actually talk to the guys on the ODAs and in the different teams to figure out like, where's it at? Yeah. Like, I actually don't know how effective it's been. I do think it, from like my time, if you rolled back the clock and you said, okay, there are some people, and we just have to admit it, right? It's like, I was never going to play professional basketball. Like, I just don't have the physical build for it. It's just not going to happen. I'm not going to play professional basketball. I'm not going to play professional football. I'm not going to play, you know, multiple different professional sports because I don't have the actual, my genetics will prevent me from being successful. Like, I just couldn't have happened. I'm 5'7", 160 pounds. So when you look at the actual genetics of who's applying specifically for these roles, you say, okay, what are the main differences from a general swath saying, you know, male and female, and going, okay, well, we're selecting for a very specific physical profile. It has fucking literally to do with, you know, whether or not you have a penis or a vagina. It has everything to do with whether or not you're physically capable. I do not think you should drop standards. Like, I don't think that's
what his argument was.
You should not have to drop standards. The standard is a standard because the standard is there to protect your mission success criteria. That's what the fucking standard is. So there's plenty of females that could destroy me in like the CrossFit games, right? 100%. They would deadlift more, squat more, run faster. Like there's some beasts over there. But generally speaking, right, from a giant swath of data, like I can dead weight, squat, pull more weight, like generally speaking, right? Pound for pound, it's just the way it is. So I think that's kind of like my 2 cents. Is how does the integration work? We shouldn't be capitulating based on, political correctness. We should only be focused and consumed with mission success criteria. We should never lower the standards. If anything, if we're increasing the pool of applicants, there should be a tightening of standards. If you're going to open it up to a huge percentage of the general recruitment force, wouldn't you think you could restrict, not open up the standards? Because if you just opened yourself up to another 30% of applicants, you're going to have more people that are applying. You should be able to tighten up your standards.
Yeah.
But then that would be perceived as excluding, right? So then the political correctness.
Racist. That's racist.
Yeah. So that's like my 2 cents. I don't know if I'm right. I don't know if I'm wrong, but I think most of the time what people have to be open to is we have to be objective. We have to look at the data. We have to look at the combat effectiveness of the force and make the best decisions for that. And then we shouldn't be persuaded based on political correctness or, some type of woke propaganda horseshit where, we're going to be deteriorate our combat effectiveness based on some type of bullshit propaganda platform. I don't say that platform, but it's like you shouldn't say, oh, well, we take one, take all, because it's not like the NFL is saying, okay, well, now we're going to open it up to, everybody. So now we have to have 50% female in the NFL. Bro, that would not go well. It would not go well. Like you'd have more head injuries. You'd have it would be really, that would be crazy.
I just saw a video of a fat dude fighting 2 professional female fighters in a ring.
Yeah.
And it was a fat dude who had no experience as a fighter versus 2 professional female fighters. And he whipped their ass.
Oh, man.
He looked like, was it Jelly Bean?
Yeah, right.
Jelly
roll.
No.
Oh, Jelly Bean. I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
Butterbean.
Yeah, Butterbean.
Wrong bean.
Yeah.
Wrong error.
Right.
But he looked like Butterbean, and he just waylaid these chicks. I mean, they were trying to do all this, they were trying to get him in a rear naked choke, and he just threw him on the ground and side hit him with so much force because he was just a big, heavy mass of a man. And it's you can't get past that. I mean, it's we're required in recce on my team. We were jumping often 100+ pound rucks.
Yeah.
I mean, I was the MSS, the mission support site. My ruck was a minimum of 100 pounds, and I was free falling with that, and then had to put it on my back and carry it, which is almost half my body weight. And just that alone is enough for me to go, okay, we need probably take more than a look and just to say we're opening up the schools to the women. It's that's not, we have to consider a lot of things here.
There's a lot of different variables. I mean, I think even I was talking to a buddy of mine who's a smoke jumper, and they were talking about opening up the standards and allowing women specifically to be smoke jumpers, and they lowered the standards. Well, why did they lower the standards? It doesn't make any sense. So you keep the standard high because you need to maintain a mission success criteria. That's what it is. So that's what the standard is, the standard.
Yeah.
It shouldn't have anything to do with, whether or not this person's 7 feet tall or 4 feet tall, because that's also not a criteria as far as whether or not you go.
Yeah.
I think the only type of height restriction there is based on the fact that can you fit into a litter board, or can you fit in here, whatever it might be. I got one more question that I got to have answered, which is, what does it look like we release military and tier 1 assets on the cartels? What's it look like?
I thought about this, and it's there are already likely target packets built and developed and evolved. And so when you take assets like the National Mission Force and you start targeting bad guys, one, it looks like a whole bunch of fun. I mean, it looks like the most awesome mission sets,
right,
if you're in those organizations in the history of your career. But it also is a lot of death for them right out the gate. I mean, a lot. Think about the the targeted strikes alone with, look, I don't think there'll be a lot of kinetic. I don't think there'll be a lot of raids. I wouldn't want to waste the assault force.
No, you wouldn't have to.
What I would do is I would drop a lot of bombs.
Yeah.
I would do a lot of offsets and BDAs, battle damage assessments of those places. But they've been fighting a fake war, cartels have, since the beginning. I mean, cutting and lobbing farmers' heads off in a cornfield and showing how strong you are is what they've been doing. Like, they've been taking advantage of a lot of innocent and weak people, because that's how they roll. That's their strength, right? Is bullying weak people. When our tier one, when our special operations elements start going after them, they will have never seen that side of warfare ever, because they've never been confronted like that. I mean, think about it. They have all the equipment and they have this false sense of security. They've been shooting at innocent and incompetent people their entire lives. What happens when one dude or one team with a set of NVGs and lasers lands with all the proficiency in the world, surgical precision, and annihilates them?
Right.
It will look like, targets in Afghanistan and Iraq, where, you go onto the target set and 30 plus people, enemy combatants are killed. And you're like, how does that happen? It's like, it happens because they're not even close. And I think they have a lot of bravado, because that's the culture they've evolved. They have no capability. And so it won't take long. I'm hoping that's going to be the case. It was just announced that Trump is going to use the military to deport a lot of these illegals, starting with phase one, as J.D. Vance led out on Rogan's podcast, with the criminals. Even then, I mean, the two-phased operation of mass deporting criminals, scumbags, pieces of trash that shouldn't be in this country in the first place, with striking targets at the same time. Wow. What I will say is it's going to be a lot more dangerous for everyday Americans, because you have to remember the cartel, if waging war against America, which I think that's probably what they would do, at least virtuously. They would say, we're waging a war, while they cower and crawl into holes, likely not in Mexico, that they're deeply embedded here. And if, let's just say 1% of the 10 to 20 million illegals that are here are cartel embedded members, and they're given the permissions to create sabotage and chaos to do anything, it could get bad. I mean, you could see a lot of insurgency in America from these actors that are embedded here. However, if you're a shithead from the cartels and you're in America and you're like, well, they're bombing the hell out of my hometown, killing all of the guys that I knew from the cartel, maybe I just should be like a good dude and just like change my ways. You would think they would change their ways really fast and immerse themselves in the culture, in American culture, and just like try to get in where they fit in and blend in and put that life behind them, because it's not going to be advantageous. A global pursuit in the way that it's done across the globe, they will be hunted wherever they are. And I would not want to be on the receiving end of one of those task force entities.
No.
Did you hear I'm in the running for the Secretary of Veteran Affairs?
Are you really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Day one, I'm firing everybody. Everybody's
seriously?
fired. I would privatize. I would do my best to privatize as much as that is possible, because it's just a broken system. I'm dealing with my back right now. I just got a medical bill in the mail for an injury from military service. I'm 100% service connected and disabled. 100%. You can't change that rating, because all the things that I have is like 4,000%. And I got a bill in the mail saying I got to pay for something that is related to a surgery I had in my back related to service,
right,
that now I have to go through this arduous process, which most veterans don't even know how to, I don't even know where to start. And I have to go through this process again, and it's years in the making.
God,
what a broken shit organization.
Well, I think it's so big. Like it's $1 trillion. When you think about it, it's $1 trillion.
You know, there's only
so
one
big.
one Utah Veteran Affairs hospital.
Yeah, and it's
Salt Lake City.
And I was talking to my buddy Jeff, and he was telling me that he did a short stint because he went back and became a nurse. He did a short stint in the VA just as a guy that was volunteering. There was not one combat veteran within the psychological health team. Not one veteran. So he was talking about how they didn't know how to properly assess whether or not a person had really been to combat. So you had people that were in there talking about how this is a combat injury from Kuwait. And Jeff was like, yeah, it didn't exist. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And they're like, how do you know? And he's like, because like, was he in Desert Storm? Like he was born in 2001. Like he was born 10 years after. And they're like, wow, you're quite a historian, or whatever. But it's just insane.
There's a lot of malingering in that place.
There is, yeah.
Which is sad.
And there's an organization that's supposed to be built around vets, not hiring vets, not building a pipeline directly back into the veteran community, and then building not only a skill bridge from the medical professionals, specifically within the military, into the VA, because for whatever reason, they've been able to build this institution outside of the military that's $1 trillion, saying, well, we're going to help and we're going to go, help veterans. However, we don't have any veterans on our staff. And it's a very low percentage if they do, which is, it's really kind of absurd when you think about it.
When you think about, like, I thought about all the organizations when I got out that were going to be potential resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know this because I was on active duty. When I got out, I went, oh, the VFW, they're going to help me because they have a resource. And so I walked into a VFW, my local VFW in town, and it's a bar. Just like every VFW is a bar. It's a write-off. It's a tax write-off for veteran of foreign wars, and it's mostly a bar. So what are they doing as an organization to help veterans? I couldn't find anybody that could help me with anything besides getting a drink. And it's a tax loophole. So that's why it's a bar, cash only or whatever it is.
Sure, yeah.
But there was no very specific organizations when I got out of service that were there to help the warfighter.
Right.
And that's the problem with the VA system is we don't have this. It's like treating the ER and the hospital system the same. You have an ER that helps people that are dealing with trauma. Imagine if you came in with a compound fracture bleeding out of your femoral with a tourniquet wrapped around your leg, and somebody told you to sit down in a lobby and you waited there for an extended period of time. They're very different. How we don't have a veteran of foreign wars or warrior program for guys who fought in war versus people who served in the military and are complaining about ailments and issues. And look, that's very controversial in the veteran community. Like when you talk about that, people are like, how dare you? The service is the same. It's not the same. Service is not created equal. And I'm not saying veterans who serve, who don't see war, aren't deserving of being taken care of. What I'm saying is they have different requirements. When I went in and talked to, when I out-processed in Texas, and I went to the Veteran Affairs in the state of Texas, in San Antonio specifically, they had a good VA system because they were dealing with a lot of combat veterans that were likely coming out of Fort Hood or whatever in Texas, right?
They have a center for the Intrepid, which takes care of amputees.
That takes care of people that are actually injured in combat. When I first met with a counselor in San Antonio, it was a Vietnam veteran who lost both of his legs, who was a long-range patrol ranger, a LRP ranger. And I was like, oh, you have all my respect. Let's talk. And I opened up to him. Came out to Utah, and the first person I talked to was like, so you seem a little jumpy. It's like, no, I'm just like, I'm vigilant because I want to live. I like pay attention when there's things going on around me because I pay attention in situational awareness. Well, that so is a characteristic and symptom of traumatic stress. Yeah. And I'm like, I know you're trying to victimize me because maybe it's good for your books,
right?
But I won't accept that. And so they're like, I literally had to negotiate my own finding. which was they wanted to give me post-traumatic stress. I said, I won't accept that. And they said, okay, what about traumatic brain injury that leads to symptoms related with post-traumatic stress? I said, I'll take that. That's good enough. Because I was like not accepting that I was going to be a victim and affected by this response. Our VA system, and I hope whoever the secretary is, 1 is a veteran, 2 is a combat veteran, 3 is a former enlisted guy.
Yeah. There needs to be more enlisted specifically in these positions. Excuse me, in these positions.
Yeah, there's not.
No. All right, Mike. Thanks, man. Great Black Rifle Coffee podcast. Appreciate you guys. Bye.